Well, Charles Coleman is a civil rights attorney. He joins us, as well as in Washington, our political analyst, Eric Ham. Both of you, real quickly here, are you surprised about this non-indictment in the Eric Garner case? Charles?
Well, I'm not surprised about the indictment. I'm not surprised about the public's reaction. I think that when you talk about Eric Garner and what's happened, you have to contextualize it within the context of multiple poor decisions from grand juries and from the judicial system that communities of color and America as a whole are reacting to.
Charles, I want to follow up with you. A number of people I talked to, prosecutors, said they were shocked that there really should have been indictments in these two cases. There was enough probable cause. In your opinion, do you think that's correct?
I do. I think what has happened is people have sort of mistaken the standard of proof, what you need in a grand jury, being probable cause, for the standard of proof at a trial jury, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not very difficult and should not be very difficult to get an indictment. I think that there are a couple of factors at play, one of which is you had policemen who are on the stand, and I think from a psychological perspective, many members of the public are inclined to give police officers a greater field of discretion with respect to executing their duties. And so the second thing that has to come into play is these were cases about intent. Was the officer intending to cause the harm that ultimately resulted? It wasn't the typical case of who done it or who did it. We know in both cases that Michael Brown was killed by Darren Wilson and that Eric Garner was killed by Danny Pantaleo. The question that the grand jury had to decide was, did they intend for that action to come about, that cause of death?
And of course, the most latest thing that came was Tamar Rice, a 12-year-old Charles, where he was killed, apparently, according to the reports, in less than 2 seconds here. There's been a lot of talk about whether training will actually do any difference at this point. Do you think police forces really need to be retrained?
Well, I think that the problem is twofold, and the solution is multi-tiered. The first issue is that there is an over-policing of communities of color throughout the United States, and that's something that needs to be addressed. Part of the way that you address that is training and standardizing some of the police procedures, because with respect to what may be done in Cleveland, that may differ from what's done in Cincinnati, which may differ from what's done in New York. And so how we engage communities of color with respect to law enforcement, that has to be seriously re-examined and addressed. The second issue is that of a mindset. You can't legislate a mindset. A lot of these incidents have occurred because police have approached black men with the sort of expectation, or they've bought into the sensationalism of the over-criminalization of black males, and that's influencing the reaction.
Right. And Eric, Charles brings up a great point. Charles, I want to end with you in terms of what we can see realistically happening, changing within police departments as a result of the protests and what's going on here. What realistically do you see changing down the road in terms of how police communities of color?
Well, I think there has to be a discussion about cultural competency with respect to law enforcement and the communities that they're policing. But to that last point, I think the biggest thing that will go to moving this thing forward is to have the same swift penalty and the same swift action for the violation of black bodies as there are for violating people of other ethnic groups. Until and unless we see that coming from top brass all the way down, these sorts of incidents, unfortunately, are bound to continue to happen.
Okay. Lastly, one other thing, I just want to squeeze this in here. Recently in the news, I think it was in Utah, apparently. Utah or Colorado, I'm not sure, there was a black police officer that was exonerated in the shooting death of a white person. It really didn't get much publicity. I'm just wondering how much of this happens the other way around, in all fairness.
Well, to be honest with you, I've looked at those statistics before, and it's unquestioned that the overwhelming majority of sort of police brutality and incidents of excessive force by law enforcement are occurring from white officers and black citizens. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen the other way around, but and to some degree the story for the media is always going to sort of be that, because of the reaction that it gets from the community.
All right, Charles Coleman here in New York. Eric Ham, as always, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.